So in this video, we're going to talk about signals intelligence, gathering data about your environment using SDRs. We're going to be looking at three in particular: the RTL SDR, classic little USB dongle. We're going to be looking at the Tiny Spectrum Analyzer Ultra. And then my personal favorite, we're going to be looking at the Hack RF in its little Portapack backpack. And we'll be talking about a number of different issues regarding these things. So let's get started. So first I want to just mention that signals intelligence, or SIGINT as it is called by the military, is a very specific, detailed thing. And then there's also COMINT, communications intelligence, which is looking at the communications of your adversary and determining stuff by looking at their communications. And then technically there's also LINT, electronic intelligence, where you're looking at electronic signals from different things, which is different from signals intelligence because it's a specific type of electronic, perhaps spurious emissions from stuff like these LED lights back here. Maybe gives you information about them, or telemetry from certain devices that is different from like the signals that they specifically are transmitting with video. So if you want to get into the military nomenclature, there's all kinds of specifics, but we are going to stick pretty general. Signals intelligence, determining what RF signals are in your area to give you useful information and intelligence about them. Now, this is important, not just because if you've been watching, say, the war in Ukraine, you can see that electronic warfare is a big deal, drone warfare is a big deal, all these things use signals, but even in your regular everyday life, everything is wireless signals nowadays. Stuff that used to be wired, like keyboards, mice, headphones, printers, all this stuff is pretty much wireless now. We even have wireless charging for phones. So the RF space that you live in is pretty much, we live in an RF world now. So being able to see into that space, being able to see what's going on with not just Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, but other stuff going on, gives you information that you otherwise don't have and might come in handy. Now, obviously, you can just pull out your phone, turn on Wi-Fi, and see which Wi-Fi access points are visible in your area. You can scan for Bluetooth devices and see which Bluetooth devices are nearby. And maybe that tells you something, maybe it doesn't. It's kind of more like information than it is technically intelligence, but there are some exceptions to this. For example, at SHOT Show, they often give little Bluetooth trackers to the attendees glued inside of their name badges. And then they use that to keep track of the flow of traffic on the floor, figure out where different booths should be in the future, stuff like that. But if you scan for Bluetooth low energy devices, you can see these trackers, and they have a pretty obvious name. So you can go places in Las Vegas, pull out your phone, and check exactly how many SHOT Show attendees are in the restaurant that you were at or on the plane that you were boarding. So that stops being just general information and it starts being more specific intelligence, which is potentially actionable. And all kinds of devices have it. Even this little Garmin watch here. Garmin lets you install apps on your watches. So in addition to the fantastic, if I say so myself, T-Rex arms watch face gives you lots of information. You can go in here and you can download their specific Bluetooth scanner app, and just right here on your wrist you can see how many SHOT Show attendees we have nearby. It's currently 0 because I pulled the batteries out of all of my Bluetooth trackers earlier. But if we look at some specific devices, we want to look at more than just Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. We want to see a wider spectrum. We need to get some tools that do more than just look at Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. And we're going to start with the humble RTLSDR.com. A software-defined radio is different from a hardware-defined radio. It helps probably if you remember an old-fashioned FM radio in a car, where you actually tuned the radio to different parts of the FM radio spectrum using a knob. You mechanically move a tuner, and you have filters that actually limit the amount of signal that's coming into the radio radio and the signal that you're hearing through the speakers. It can only see a tiny band of this. Now, in previous videos, we've talked about how the RF spectrum is a little bit like the visual light spectrum that you can see with your eyes. In this video that I'm going to link to over here, we made HF be red, and we made VHF be blue, and UHF be green, and then Wi-Fi and Bluetooth stuff we put up in the purple spectrum, which I think is a helpful way to kind of see the different bands. But another way to look at this is if you, again, think about radio spectrum in a visual sense. Look at this image here. You're currently seeing, thanks to the beauty of the cameras and YouTube, a full color image. It's actually not a lot of green in here, but if you could only look at one wavelength at a time in this image, you could scan through different wavelengths of light and see different stuff. Now, if you're wanting to just verify that there's no green in the image, maybe this is kind of a useful tool for certain applications. But generally speaking, it's much better to see the entire spectrum, see the full color, see that there are pasty skin tones over here and there is blue back there, and everything that's on the table is visible if you can see the whole spectrum. What software-defined radio lets us do is basically that. See a wide swath of radio spectrum and then tune into the specific bits that we want without losing that full picture. So let's begin by plugging this into a regular laptop computer and seeing what we get just here in Middle Tennessee, and just using these terribly small tuned antennas. Talk about antennas more in a second. All right, so I'm going to start the software SDR console. There's a bunch of different SDR software packages, but this one does something really neat that I want you guys to see. So once we have the data coming off of here into the computer, I can now see a pretty wide spread of spectrum. So I am looking at the ham bands, 20-meter bands right here. And it is relatively quiet on here because I am using this tiny antenna. And I'm using the tiny antenna because of some stuff that I specifically want to do later. And yet I'm still able to see stuff happening way down here in those 20-meter bands. Now, if you remember our HF radio video where we used, I think we were in the 40 meters where we were most successful talking all the way out towards the West Coast to the Tech Prepper. Transmission requires a very tuned antenna. Reception is way more forgiving. So we could just grab a loop of speaker wire, throw it out that door, and get way more stuff. But even with this tiny, ridiculous, terrible, cheap Wi-Fi antenna on the side of here, we're still seeing stuff down here in 14 megahertz. There are signals that I can zoom in on and I can grab right here. And if I turn on our audio, I can actually listen to some of this stuff. And if I knew what I was doing, we'll talk a little bit more about the learning curve here later. We could actually determine exactly what we're listening to and figure out the exact settings that we need to listen in on this stuff. But what I'm seeing is a couple of little channels down here and a couple of louder channels here that are doing some transmitting. Let me turn off the audio because it is distracting. But not only can we see the entire spectrum and figure out what's going on, how active this band is, where there might be either some free room for us to communicate with other people in here or some people that we may want to talk to, we can do something very special with SDR console. So this right here is the entire band. But up here is a receiver. We have programmed a receiver to look at this particular area. And then down here you can see we're using upper sideband. We could do lower sideband. We could listen for AM, carrier wave, which is generally Morse code, and wide or narrow band FM. We have all our modes down here. We can see some more data over in the corner. But we can also make more receivers. So let's just set up 3 receivers right here. They are green, red, and blue. And I can just tune these receivers. So this red receiver and this blue receiver are receiving different things. So now I can listen to 3 different things at once. And since that's potentially not as useful for me with my human ears, I can actually go in here and send the output, the audio output of these different receivers to different things. It's part of the reason you might want to do this on a laptop computer is I could have other ham radio software running in the background. So I could be listening to some JS8 call traffic and send that to JS8 call, which is running on the same computer that my FT8 receiver is. I can pipe data from this directly into that. So with a very small setup, this laptop has plenty of battery life still, and this $40 SDR and a loop of speaker wire, I could be listening to a whole bunch of ham radio traffic. The software is really the limit at this point. Now, that being said, there are some hardware limitations. This RTL SDR is kind of an older device. I think that they've been around for like 15 years at this point, and so one of its limitations is this is USB 2.0. There's limited bandwidth going into the computer. When you talk about radio stuff, bandwidth is always a confusing term because sometimes it talks about an actual band width, like what width of the band are we actually listening to? And if you're smart with different protocols, you can squeeze more data into a narrower bandwidth. When we're talking about USB, the bandwidth is the amount of data that we can pipe in. So even though we're looking at all of the 20 meter band right here, we can't actually look at the entire spectrum very quickly. It takes time to pipe that through this USB 2 connection. Now that being said, there are newer devices that are a lot faster, and they generally cost a little bit more, but if you want to experiment with this, if you want to get into this without spending any money, just to kind of see what it looks like, get your feet wet, there are people sharing their own SDR devices on the internet, and you can check them out for free. So this is Kiwi SDR. This is a fantastic SDR that you can run, and once you plug it into your computer, you can also share it over the internet, and it runs its own little web server. So it's just a fantastically useful tool, but you can also share that on the internet, and a bunch of people have. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of people here. We listen to what the traffic is in London, in Switzerland, in Italy, in Finland. This is a fantastic way to learn not just like how different things work on the spectrum, but you could tune into radios in different places and see what the signal is actually looking like on different parts of the globe. How far signals actually go, how they attenuate, stuff like that. I'm kind of looking for an American one. Let me just search Tennessee and see what we've got. Here's one in White House, Tennessee. Let's see what we've got. That is not too far from here. It should look a little bit like, let's see. This guy would like us to enter our call sign before he shows us data. So here we are looking at a large chunk of data. We are looking at a very large swath of the band right here, and it is very helpfully labeled. As we zoom in on some of these things, we should be able to isolate some specific bands that we want to look at. All right, so here is that 20 meter band that we were just looking at with our own SDR, and when we zoom in, you can see that what's happening is we are getting a lot more detail, and as we zoom in, you can see that the information that we were getting before zoomed out is sort of lower resolution. But all we have to do is zoom in, and we get a clearer picture of what is going on. And we can isolate a specific signal, and we can listen to it, once again, just through the laptop speakers. So there's a lot of different things that you can do and you can experiment with here, and it's very helpful that they give you the labels, but they also give you some interesting tools off to the side here. If we wanted to pipe this audio data into another ham radio program and interpret it, that would be a pretty simple thing to do, even using this other guy's SDR that he is helpfully sharing with us. Now, a lot of the guys who are sharing their Kiwi SDRs have some limits. So this is really focused on the ham radio space. He's not letting us listen way up into other types of radio traffic or the aviation bands or things like this. And again, even though this is a pretty small computer with decent battery life, this may not be the best field kit. So you probably want to look at some of our other options. Now, you might want to plug this into your phone. So again, I mentioned there are newer SDRs out there, but this still uses regular USB-A. So I'm going to plug a device in here. Now I'm using, there's a ton of different software available for you to use. This is SDR Angel, and it is incredibly powerful. It is basically the desktop app, and it's just running inside of Android. The problem is all the buttons are so tiny that you actually will want to make sure that you have a stylus to run it so that you can actually use the interface and look around inside of here. However, even though this is an incredible amount of power in a small package, you probably want something that is a little bit more robust, potentially a little bit more rugged, and is better in the field. You probably want something like the tiny spectrum analyzer, which, I mean, the build quality doesn't make it feel any more robust, but at least it's all one piece. It's small, it has 8 hours of battery, and it can see a huge swath of spectrum, even more than this. I should point out that this tops out before you even get to Wi-Fi. So for drone detection up in the 2.4 gigahertz and 5.8 gigahertz area, this doesn't really see it, but the Tiny SA Ultra actually does. So it's getting a fair amount of use for drone detection and jammer detection in Ukraine. Now, jammer detection is probably the easiest to do because jamming doesn't look like a particular signal. It looks like a huge swath of noise across multiple bandwidths. So it's pretty easy to identify, even for people who are not particularly skilled at signals intelligence. And the reason that that is important is because we're seeing an increased level of jamming activity, not just on battlefields, but related to crime. People who want to commit crimes in various jurisdictions will often bring signal jammers with them so that their victims cannot call 911 or their GPS doesn't work. So in South Africa, in various places around Europe, there are certain activities where bad guys benefit from having signal jammers. And being able to see signals being jammed, the presence of jammers, is relatively straightforward just by looking at a spectrum down here. This will show us a tremendous amount of the spectrum, but it also has some limited bandwidth. It has some limited computing power. So if we're looking at a large swath of bandwidth, it takes a long time to actually look at it. If you're looking at everything that this can see, I think it's like 14 or 15 seconds to actually see it all. We're currently looking at the Wi-Fi spectrum right here, and you can see some Wi-Fi signals right down here. This is probably my home Wi-Fi doing stuff in this 2.4 gigahertz space right here. So if we wanted to detect drones in this space, this would be a great place for us to be looking. But it can look for almost anything. Let's look at where some handheld radio traffic might be. If we have somebody broadcasting on a small UHF radio somewhere, FRS or GMRS stuff, we know that it's happening on specific channels. We're not sure quite which one. It's relatively simple for us to see this transmission appear. I actually have a couple of markers here on the graph. So if I transmit on this radio, I can see that it is 437.5 megahertz. I forget what channel that is on FRS. But now it's really easy for me to grab another radio and set it to that frequency, and then I can listen to this radio or I can transmit to this radio. So being able to see a large swath of spectrum to figure out if anything's going on, great for identifying other radio traffic. But now let's see if we can detect a drone. So we're going to go back to that 2.4 gigahertz space. Let's just go ahead and launch a drone in here and see if we can detect it. So yeah, I mean, I think it's very silly that we're flying a drone inside of the studio here, just so that we can have some Wi-Fi signals for us to look at. But you know, it's kind of working. If we look here on our graph, we can see a lot more 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi activity. And if we look at 5.8, we should be able to see even more. Now, I'm going to land the drone because it's loud It's distracting. It's actually kind of hard to fly a drone, talk to the camera, and do electronic warfare all at the same time. But it is made easier by this device right here. I've got my on-screen controls mapped to these analog sticks, which gives me a lot more control over the device. I haven't seen too many people actually use these game controllers with the analog sticks as drone controllers, but I think it's a pretty cool capability. Gives you a little bit more control. What it does do, however, is it limits you to only regular Wi-Fi, because that's the only radio that this Retroid Pocket has. And this is a DJI drone that just uses regular Wi-Fi, which means that to do signal analysis, we're only looking at the regular Wi-Fi signals and trying to see if they're stronger than normal or they're doing different stuff than normal. If we were using a more sophisticated drone, or we were connecting this DJI Neo to a dedicated DJI controller instead of just a Wi-Fi game controller, we would be looking for a slightly different protocol than Wi-Fi, which means that we would be able to do slightly more sophisticated signals analytics and signals intelligence. We would be able to identify that not just is some Wi-Fi activity happening here in this particular range of the spectrum, we would be able to actually determine that it is in fact a drone. Now there's other ways that we could probably look at that too. We could probably watch the signal strength fluctuating. If we knew that we weren't moving, we could determine that whatever is emitting the signal is moving. You know, it would have been a better test as if somebody else controlled the drone, because the drone controller is also giving off a pretty strong signal, which is an important thing for you to remember if you do drone warfare in the middle of an electronic warfare battlefield. Let's say you do want a little bit more sophistication than just looking at the spectrum. For that, I have been doing some experimenting with the Hack RF. Now the Hack RF is a pretty fascinating device. This isn't designed to be a handheld computer. This is designed to be a regular, just a very simple single circuit board SDR that you plug into a computer, like the RTL SDR. But it has a field programmable gate array, which is something that we will talk about more in the future. And that allows people to program stuff directly onto it, like this particular operating system, which is going to let us do some interesting stuff. Once you put it in a case with some buttons and a little tuning knob right here, and a battery, this thing is pretty self-contained signals intelligence device. So let's do some signals intelligence. Not only can it look at the spectrum and show us our waterfall of different stuff that we want to look at, here is our Bluetooth and Wi-Fi spectrum. I should have left the drone on so that we could actually see what it looks like on this waterfall. Let's turn it back on and see if we see any extra activity. We're probably not going to see anything major until it starts flying around, but there are a lot of different signals going on in this space that we're looking at. So one of the things that I would do with this device is exactly what we've been doing with the Tiny SA. I would look at the spectrum and see if there's stuff going on in different places. And I could tune to 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi and see that there's activity there. And I could look at the full range, which comes in very, very slowly, because we still have bandwidth considerations. If we're looking at all radio traffic, it's going to take a while for us to actually see all of it. But the cool thing about this device is it has some smarts, it has some intelligence. It can do more than just show me the waterfall graph. It has a whole bunch of different receive modes that will let us collect different data. So if we're looking at other information, like ADS-B information, we should be able to start picking up transponders from aircraft. Let me just turn on our amplifier and see if we can get some increased sensitivity. Yeah, as soon as I turn on our amplifier, we start to see more aircraft. So the way that this works is that modern aircraft all have transponders on them. And the protocol for that transponder data is called ADS-B. So if I'm able to detect that signal, I want to be able to do more than just see it on the spectrum. I actually want to decode that signal and see what it says. So we're looking at this particular aircraft right here and looking at it on a map. That is where it is in relation to us, and we're able to grab some information about its altitude, 36,000 feet, good cruising altitude. And oftentimes there's other information here, depending on how the transponder is set up and who they're flying for. It often has heading data, and it often has speed data, and it often has airline data and country data as well. So if I'm able to capture data from these different aircraft, not just the signals themselves, I'm able to get a lot more information. And if we look at some of these different modes that are on here, we also have transponders for boats. We also have the ability to look up those Bluetooth devices on a nicer screen that actually shows me more stuff, perhaps, than that Garmin watch. I can look at a whole bunch of different things using this device and capture a ton of information. We can also scan for different channelized radio transmissions like we could on the Tiny SA, but I can actually do more than that. There's a headphone jack on the back of this thing, so I could actually plug in my headphones and demodulate some of these signals. And then the other thing that the Hack RF or H2 Portapack, if you put them all together, has is the capability to transmit. Every other device that we've talked about on the table here today is receive only. Now, the power that this thing has to transmit is very small. The battery is not huge. The wattage that you can actually send out of this thing is pretty minimal, but you can definitely do some stuff with it. You can do some fairly sophisticated stuff. In this video up here, we actually used it to not just jam a GPS. I would never jam GPS. I think that's technically a crime. But we did spoof a GPS signal and got a GPS device to think that it was in a completely different hemisphere, using just files that we put on the Hack RF itself. So the things that you can do with this device are pretty incredible. And the reason that I think that it's worth looking into this device is because it gives you some smarts in addition to just the sheer data capture capability. A lot of this stuff is kind of hard to learn. This is the second time that I am shooting this video, and it's gone much smoothly. The first time we had some camera issues, but the main thing that we had was a recognition of the fact that I have forgotten how a lot of this stuff works. These are all perishable skills. These are actually all older things, and this is stuff that I haven't messed with for a few years. This is something that you want to mess with and understand and then keep up those skills. But if you have a device that is smart enough to decode some of these digital signals and identify them for you, that is actually a huge deal. The old world of ham radio was guys in their ham shacks doing a lot of this stuff with mechanical tuning. And now that a bunch of them have software-defined radios as their ways of getting signals and decoding signals and so forth, they're stepping into kind of a whole new world of capabilities. A single device plugged into a single computer can do the work of a pretty large stack of radios. However, there are all kinds of new possibilities that have yet to be unlocked. Cognitive radio is this idea that the radio will be smart enough to figure things out, not just show me that stuff is happening in a specific band, but figure out that it is an ADS-B packet that is coming from a transponder on a plane, and then decode it for me. And there's a lot of stuff that's getting much, much better at this. We've talked about Meshtastic and LoRa. This is one of the few digital modes that you probably could kind of decode with your eyes if you wanted to. Once you send a packet, particularly if you use one of the slow modes, you can actually see not just the LoRa traffic on the screen as a signal, but you can actually see the signal moving left to right as the spread spectrum protocol goes up and down. You can actually decode that into ones and zeros and then type that into your computer and turn it back into an actual message, which is very cool, except for the fact that you should really just let the computer do that for you. It doesn't take a lot of brain power. This is a super tiny LoRa device that I've been carrying in my my pocket pretty much everywhere I go these days, and it has the capability to act as a mesh-tastic server, both decoding and encoding and forwarding all kinds of low raw traffic, and then Bluetoothing straight to my phone so I can see it. So this doesn't have to be a super hard job that takes a lot of work to do. Our devices should be smart enough to do some of this stuff for ourselves. If I send a mesh-tastic message over here, by the way, this is the T-Deck that LilyGo makes, and this is the new firmware that we have. It's got a lot of cool features. Technically, it's not out yet. This is a pre-alpha, but if you know how, you can get it. So I'm going to send a message here, and we're going to see if we can intercept it and watch it on our graph. And sure enough, we can see a whole bunch of low raw traffic just appeared right there, and then possibly some spurious emissions over here. Not sure what that is, but remember, we are keeping these two antennas super close to each other. This is part of the reason that I wanted to use bad antennas for this stuff, since we're doing it all on a single tabletop. So looking at low raw traffic on the waterfall is very cool, and I've learned enough about some of these different protocols that I'm actually reasonably good at recognizing some of them, but the computer can do a lot of that work for us if we build the right tools for it. So that's going to be the next part of this video. In a week or two, we'll talk about some future tools. But in the meantime, I want you to mess around with some of the tools that exist in the present. This is a $40 device, and you should probably own one. But before you order it, you should probably just get on a Kiwi SDR for free and tinker around. Listen to some different signals, either in the area where you live or an area of the world where you would like to learn more, like maybe Russia or Ukraine. Maybe you can see some electronic warfare and jamming stuff going on in different parts of the spectrum. Or just listen to shortwave radio and some of the BBC broadcasts that happen globally. There's all sorts of interesting traffic for you to listen to, and it is a great way to learn more about how the spectrum works. But I think that that is something that you do need to do, whether you go deeper into the ham radio side, whether you go deeper into decentralized digital communications, or have a better idea of how drone stuff works. The world is increasingly run by radio waves. There's going to be more and more signals out there, and so being able to gather signals intelligence becomes more and more useful. I would argue that this is becoming increasingly not just a fun hobby, but possibly a responsibility. So digital machines are way better at interpreting the digital signals that are sent by machines than us squishy humans are. But there is actually one exception, which is kind of fun, and I love it. In 1930, there was a guy named Dr. Hell. And he invented a way of sending messages over RF that is kind of brilliant. It is called Hellschreiber. There's also field hell. There's different ways of doing this. And what it does is actually inside of the waterfall display, inside of the spectrum that you see, it creates visible letters that you can then read in English or German or whatever. But the cool part of it is that the human brain and eye combination is actually much better at reading those letters as they get noisy than the error correction or signal processing was at the time. So it's kind of a brilliant solution to seeing and reading messages inside of a lot of interference, potential jamming, and signals that are very weak and fall below the noise floor. But as awesome as that is, today we do have all kinds of digital transmission protocols that have really good error correction and various things that are maybe better than our brains and our eyes.